Hello, my name is Joe Vance. I am graduating with a major in psychology and a minor in chemistry. I'm very proud to talk about my honors thesis titled Focusing on Those Who Cannot Focus. It's about ADHD. It's a systematic review on the historical understanding of what is now known as ADHD, and it synthesizes it with modern day fMRI research on the disorder. And the central argument of my thesis is a simple one, that despite a long history of being treated as a failing of moral character, lack of willpower, a result of terrible parenting, which are attitudes still found today in the 2020s, ADHD is very much a neurological based disorder. People with ADHD have neural activation differences in numerous parts of their brains, and these differences can be measured using a technology called functional magnetic resonance imaging. I'll talk more about that later. But all told, these problems result in struggles with numerous cognitive functions that make everyday life more difficult for people with ADHD. I picked this topic for two reasons. First, I myself have ADHD, and I'm actually interested in doing fMRI brain research on this disorder as a career. And to that end, next year, I will be going to graduate school at the University of Chicago to help me attain this goal. I'll be studying psychology and neuroscience. And the second reason is that sometime in 2019, I got tired of seeing talking heads get up on the news and say that ADHD is overdiagnosed, that kids are actually having their attention spans siphoned by spending too much time on their phones, that back in their day, they called those people lazy and they didn't have no ADHD hand-holding. These assertions are false, and I wanted to prove them false. So, as an aspirant cognitive neuroscientist, I set out to learn which brain regions experience activation differences in the ADHD brain, what these areas are responsible for, and how this manifests itself in everyday life more behaviorally. And I found a lot of really cool stuff. But first, I talked about functional magnetic resonance imaging earlier. Many of you have probably heard of MRI. It's a machine that's used to scan brains, often used to detect cancerous growth in the brain. fMRI is just like that, except it can also employ a technique called blood oxygen level dependent imaging, BOLD, bold imaging, which uses magnets to interact with the iron in the blood flowing through the brain. As blood goes to various parts of the brain, the fMRI can detect that, and using that, you can determine which parts of the brain are responsible for which cognitive tasks, which is pretty cool in my opinion. But anyway, there's this thing called the dopaminergic reward system, and it's responsible for reward processing. And the ventral striatum is part of this dopaminergic reward system, and it has reduced neural activation in ADHD brains compared to non-ADHD brains. And this results in ADHD people being more impulsive, a very common side effect, symptom of ADHD, which means that they're worse at weighing the rewards offered by different options they must choose between in everyday life. For instance, do you choose to study for your crucial chemistry midterm the next day? Or do you choose to spend 2 hours playing Lego Star Wars with your pal? The reward of getting a better grade and more than 90 minutes of sleep at night? Or the reward of beating up Lego Darth Maul? And to the ADHD brain, it's very hard to choose the option that doesn't involve beating up Lego Darth Maul. But it's not always lower neural activation. Sometimes it's actually higher neural activation. One of the studies I covered quite intensively in my thesis was it found that there's greater neural activation in the posterior cingulate cortex and the precunious in ADHD brains compared to those without ADHD. And the posterior cingulate cortex is involved in what's called the brain's default mode network, which is basically just what your brain does when you're not particularly doing anything, when you're just kind of sitting there. And the precunious is involved in a variety of brain functions, but particularly it's involved in self-referential thought and memory. Memories specifically pertaining to your own experiences. So this relationship suggests that when there's not much to do, the ADHD brain can go into hyperdrive, searching for something to do, and quite easily falling into a state of getting caught up in a fixation with the state of their own mind or with memories pertaining to themselves. And this might sound kind of confusing, but of all the things I learned in my honors thesis research, this was my favorite because it provided scientific basis for a somewhat inexplicable, obscure phenomenon that I find myself experiencing very, very frequently these days. And I had no idea what to think about it until I read these articles. You see, as my time in college comes to an end, I find myself increasingly becoming fixated with the memories I made during college, the good ones and the bad ones. Sometimes I spend more time reliving the bad memories from 2.5 years ago than I do making new memories now in the present. Getting caught up in self-referential memories like this is apparently not just a weird thing I'm going through now, it's apparently a symptom of ADHD that I had never heard of before. And this got me thinking that there must be some sort of under-researched brain network containing both the precunious and the posterior cingulate cortex that, when overactivated, like in the brains of people with ADHD, results in sort of getting trapped in a terrible cycle of your own memories, which is very hard to escape from. And I want to research this more in the future. Because there's so much I found out during my research, during my project, and I can't talk about all of the things I researched. There's so much more than what I've said, but though I accomplished the goal I set out to do, I'm pretty sure I could beat anyone in an argument who tries to tell me that ADHD people are just lazy, because I know quite a lot about it now. But now I just have so many more research goals I want to achieve, so many ideas that I want to explore in grad school, maybe even after grad school. There's so many more steps that I can take, but at least for now, thank you for listening to me talk about my first steps.